guys got to see this blooper reel and see what I deal with every single day when I'm trying to record these damn lectures. In any case, right, we've seen how this pissant little small village right here in Rome, not even near Greece, for God's sake, right? Away from the center of action over here in the Near East, how this came to expand and take over much of the Mediterranean by the end of the 2nd century, eventually all the way up in here into Germany, controlling everything, all the way basically through Syria, all the way into Britannia. Roman people are amazing. I mean, they're terrible. You would hate any Roman person you ever met. However, you gotta respect. You can't hate. Well, I guess you can hate both the player and the game when it comes to imperialism. But in any case, right? We're trying to explain how we got to this point. We've done a pretty good job getting there so far. Now, though, it's time for us to explain how it is that the Republic, having achieved all of this, why did it descend into chaos, civil war, and eventually into an overthrow, a monarchical overthrow, in the rise of Augustus, right? So go ahead and explain this. But of course, as always, we got to do some review here, right? Because there's a lot going on in this, a lot of moving parts. So let's look at the Roman Senate. Remember, this is just an advisory body. It has no, there's no constitution in Rome to speak of. There's no written document saying what the Senate does and doesn't do. It just sort of accumulates powers over time. And it does so because it's just the repository, right? The home base, the only institution that contains all of these ex-magistrates with all of their beneficium being bestowed, which gives them lots of auctoritas, the Latin word for authority, that comes from holding office and doing all this beneficia. In the Senate itself, this is sort of the only permanent institution to speak of here. Within the Senate, we have these principes, the principals, essentially, the most powerful leading men. They belong to the established families of the Republic that can trace their lineage all the way back even into the old monarchical period. We're talking about all the ex-consuls, people with the greatest fame and the greatest glory, right? The big fish here. And so these senior senators, these principes, often act as a coalition. They mostly think and believe the same things. They were raised in the same kind of environment. They all go to the same stupid country club, basically, right? And frankly, as these principes go, so goes the Senate, at least in this, 5th, 4th, 3rd, 2nd century BCE period. And frankly, as the Senate goes, so goes everybody within the elites. Everyone wants to sort of maintain a united front, because the last thing you want is these uppity plebs coming through and trying to overthrow the whole game. And I'm talking about, of course, the people in the assemblies, right? We hear that the Roman assembly, the people, the body of citizens, ought to be the center of power in Rome. They should be sovereign. But Polybius actually shows, this Greek historian, shows how this is not the case. Because remember, these assemblies, just like in Greece, frankly, just like in Athens, are really controlled by powerful elite magistrates, the consuls, the praetors, and as we'll see, the tribunes of the plebs. These presiding officials who call the assemblies are the only people who get to choose the speakers, who are able to address the assembled citizens. And remember, the people can't offer but maybe you should throw in a little, the pig unions, hey, maybe you can help us out with reducing those pig tariffs. They're driving us crazy. In any case, only really the leading magistrate who holds the assembly gets to determine what's in the law. And so the official actual text of any decree, from the Senate, is actually brought before the people. The people could only vote yes or no. And so you can see already these structural features that make the assemblies actually somewhat weak here. But into this walks the tribunes of the plebs, right? Remember, these are these old revolutionary magistrates. Again, all this is in the textbook, it should be at least. All these tribunes have been essentially co-opted into the elite for the most part. They started out as a revolutionary magistracy, and they have really, they're incredibly powerful. There are also a lot of them. You can see here, right, that there are 10 of these tribunes elected every single year. These guys have all kinds of powers, right? They have absolute veto power, so they can say anything that's happening in the state, over, right? The record stops. The tribunes say, not going to happen, and that's that, right? They're also able to call the people's assemblies. And so, they can bring people forth to go vote on legislation, etc. And things are all great here. As long as the elites who are in the position of being tribunes of the plebs, as long as they sort of toe the line, as long as they're a part of the system, and they have to be, right, because they want to rise up in the rank, they sort of never really rock the boat until we get to the end of the 2nd century BCE. Because keep in mind, because of their incredible power, right, if a tribune of the plebs opposed the Senate, or if that tribune of the plebs should see the people as a way to progress their career, as a way to sort of rise up the ranks as a sort of alternative way than going through the elite method, right? Not only would the Senate lose its sovereignty, right? It's sort of like de facto power in the state. Power would instead shift towards these guys, the tribunes of the plebs, as leaders of the popular assemblies. And this is a bit of what we see in the second half of the 2nd century BCE, like I said. This is one of the factors we have to keep in mind if we're thinking about why the Republic fell. And again, this may seem like some kind of a lot of pedantic, sort of minutia. But the idea that I really want to hit home with is that if you want to explain something as large and as sort of important as the fall of a constitutional system, it's not just going to be one element that does it. You got to think about all these different moving parts at once. And so as you look at American politics, you should be keeping this in the back of your mind as well, right? But not only do we have these tribunes of the plebs rising up in power, we also have an enormous amount of wealth coming in from the empire all over the Italian peninsula. And it's really accumulating, and this is going to be a shocker to you, right? It's going to be accumulating for the most part within the hands of the elite. These generals go off and they fight these wars, and they sort of tuck a little bit of that gold inside their pockets here. They have these big bulky, togas and whatnot. They're able to keep a lot of the loot for themselves. Not only that, but money is to be made by wealthy individuals by financing overseas trade, but also agriculture at home, especially now that you have a bigger, more robust elite economy. You start seeing the market for meat rise. So you start seeing a lot more pastoralism. Things that used to be impossibly expensive are now getting a little bit cheaper, but they're still only really there for the elite. So not everyone's benefiting from all of this empire. And not only that, right? But because Rome is conquering everybody, essentially, Rome is beginning to form a slave society, as opposed to, of course, a society with slaves. What this means is that their entire economy essentially requires slavery, otherwise it will collapse. So imagine pre-Civil War, the southern part of the United States. What's weird, though, is that these slaves that are won from overseas wars come into Italy, and they either replace people on their farms, we think, or they act as pastoralists, right? Because they're trying to bring all this new meat into the Roman market. You have to have people out there taking care of these herds. Well, I'll tell you this. If you're a pastoralist and you're out in the wild like this guy right here, you can sort of see him. You're fighting off wolves, right? In Italy, you're fighting off all kinds of other dangerous prey, including the most dangerous game, human beings, right? And so you have to arm these guys in order to be able to defend against these dangers. Well, I don't know how no one figured this out themselves, right? But, arming a bunch of slaves is kind of a recipe for disaster. Even by 185 BC, so 100 years before Spartacus, really, a magistrate has to put down a huge band of pastoralist brigands. Some 7,000 of them are executed. And this is not surprising, right? Most of these slaves are won in war. Many of them are soldiers, and none of them want to be there, right? I mean, being a slave is freaking terrible. So in any case, right, you have all this vast new wealth. You have the tribunes of the plebs sort of realizing their innate power. And you're also seeing a changing political, social, economic, religious sphere in Rome more broadly, right? Excuse me. Oh, that's probably gross for you to see. In any case, right, the traditional system of patron-client, this relationship that had been really developing for centuries, is increasingly disrupted in the 2nd century BCE. On the one hand, right, you have the growth of Rome as a city into an urban area with hundreds of thousands of people, right? You just simply don't have enough patrons to take care of that many people. And you're also seeing a lot of those people who are moving into the city of Rome are very, very poor. And so they are increasingly, right, need some kind of assistance. There's no state there to take care of them. What are you going to do? Well, people are going to get restive and bad things are going to go down, as we'll see. But at the same time, right, now that there's so many people, there's somewhat of a captive audience for these elites to try and court these people directly, right? So you see the rise of banqueting, huge triumphs, all kinds of games put on for the people, new aqueducts, and all kinds of monuments around the city to appeal to, the citizens directly. Nevertheless, it's all well and good to have a cool arch here and there, right? But let me tell you when I don't care about arches, and that's when I'm starving to death. You know what I mean? So you gotta they need to maintain a balance, and they're just not doing it. Well, the tribunes of the plebs see themselves as potentially a way to not only help the plebeian class, this sort of larger, citizen body more broadly, but also gain power from doing so. And they begin to threaten the establishment, who's reluctant to actually cede any power to the people or to even help them out in any kind of tangible way. And so an important name for you to know here are two brothers, Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus. And these guys are about as blue blood as it gets, right? This is like the Rockefeller, Kennedy kind of, class. Their fathers had been, their father had been twice consul, had triumphed twice, had been a censor, right? These guys are elites, the elite of the elite, the top 0.0001%. Nevertheless, their attempt to help out the people, to distribute land to the landless, to bring grain to the poor, is going to lead to their assassination. People fear that the elites fear that they're becoming tyrants, right? That they're trying to take over the state, establish a monarchy, and so they have them assassinated. And this actually inaugurates a new phase of the Roman Republic known as the Roman Revolution. It's a series of decades where we see nothing but violent, sort of pursuits of power. Because now, really, violence is in the system. It's always a constant threat. You have to take drastic action to succeed. Tensions escalate. There's more and more bloodshed, and this becomes like a sort of cycle. And this is why precedent is so dangerous, right? And I want you guys to internalize this message. Because when the culture itself begins to change as a result of past action, right? When violence is inserted in the system, it tends to metastasize. That is to grow wildly out of control like a cancer. And not only that, let's say that you were born in 155 BCE. You come of age into a political world where you're seeing people assassinated now. Well, that's going to change your mindset, but your children's mindset, they're going to grow up in a world where that's already normal. Right? So we're going to move from targeted assassinations to outright full-on civil wars, and you can see how that progresses incrementally, right? It becomes less and less of a sort of cohesive citizen body and more of a fractious, violent elite. So we can look at some trends that are developing here that, again, I think are useful for you in terms of understanding the world we live in today. How does a republic fall apart and what we can do to guard against it? Well, first we see that the Senate is losing power to the people and to the tribunes. And that seems all fair, well and good. But the Senate, because it doesn't have a whole lot of constitutional power, it can only really turn to a couple of means to stop this. It can either obstruct them with religion, right, or it can use violence to defend its traditional powers. And they opt for both of those things, which demeans the political system more broadly, but also religion as part of it. We're starting to see a changing landscape as well as changing font. This is so ugly, I'm sorry, guys. A changing landscape, right? We're seeing more and more wealth, but it's all concentrated at the very top. We're starting to see a very decadent elite that's showing off on Instagram their new toga, that Gucci toga, you know what I mean? It's a little bit different than the average person's. But even more importantly, I think for us as modern people, right? We're seeing gridlock in the system. Real reform is clearly needed here to solve the problems that Rome is developing, right? But these reforms that are needed actually serves to undermine the political elite. So the political elite is unwilling to actually go through with these reforms. They want to avoid one person, one man growing to be too powerful by gaining all the credit for solving any problems. So, you can imagine, right? There's gridlock in a political system because neither side is willing to actually negotiate or sort of capitulate or compromise. And increasingly, it leads to, more and more gridlock and more potential violence. Like, I don't know, trying to overthrow the government by invading the Capitol building. But who am I? Just a lowly, humble historian trying to bring this to your attention. More than that, though, you also have these generals who are relying on landless men to serve in their armies as people are more and more reluctant to fight. And in order to incentivize them to actually fight for Rome, you have to promise them stuff like land. Well, the Senate, of course, doesn't want to do this. It's afraid that that person's going to become too powerful. And so the soldiers see that the Senate is like their enemy, right? The generals, on the other hand, who are trying to work on their behalf, are like their patrons. Their rewards are really tied to that general's success. That means that soldiers become even more active in politics. They become tied to individuals and not to the Roman state or the Roman Republic as a whole. This leads to an even more fearful Senate, which is even more willing to resort to violence, and so on and so forth, right? And again, if the acts of the last year have shown anything, we are potentially walking ourselves slowly towards that same fate, which we're going to finish up with, I think, in this next lecture. I'll see you guys there.